Welcome to the Making Kids Count podcast, brought to you by Kentucky Youth Advocates, where we sit down with policymakers, community leaders, and youth to discuss ideas to make Kentucky the best place to be young.
Thanks for tuning in to the Making Kids Count podcast. I'm Mara Powell, KYA's Chief External Affairs Officer, and I have the privilege today to sit down with KYA's new Executive Director, Dr. Shannon Moody. So while you're new to the role and you're just not new to the podcast, for our long season listeners, you're not new to the organization for our many partners and groups that you've interacted with through the years, and you're definitely not new to child advocacy. So as just a little reintroduction though for our listeners, can you share just a little bit more about yourself and your background, what led you to KYA, and your nearly 15-year tenure here at the organization?
Yeah, thanks, Mara. And I'm so glad that you're on the podcast because you're usually behind the scenes. So it's good to have you on and have folks get to know you as well. So for me, I like to say I'm a Kentuckian by choice. I've been in Kentucky for 14 years now. I am Michigan born. Before I came to Kentucky and KYA, I worked in therapeutic juvenile detention in Michigan. I moved to Tennessee to pursue my master's degree at University of Tennessee. And I also worked in school-based mental health at the time. So I have a fair amount of on-the-ground experience when it comes to kids, especially in the juvenile justice settings, education settings, and then child welfare settings. And, what led me to this policy work and really Kentucky Youth Advocates is I kept seeing things on the ground that left me kind of wondering, like, what is going on with the decision making that's happening when we talk about policies and practices when it comes to kids. And, I was often seeing a lot of barriers that were created by policy that impacted kids and families. So I knew that, when I was in my master's program, I wanted to do policy work. I knew I wanted to work with kids because that had been really where my heart was. And I landed in Louisville with an internship at KYA after going through, the interview process. And then I just stuck around. I would not let KYA get rid of me. And I started as like a policy analyst here, really digging in to what KYA does best, which is really get a sense of what's going on when it comes to kids and families on the data, the research, and the voices of individuals. And, I just continue to show up at KYA now as the executive director, which I am delighted and also just really humbled with the opportunity. But I get to show up as my 8-year-old nerdy self and just keep asking questions to try to get an understanding of how Kentucky kids are faring and how we can make that better.
I love that. And building off of kind of your interests of getting that on the ground voice and bringing in the data and research side, we featured last month on KYA's blog, something that you're most proud of is the organization's growth in regional connectivity and engagement, especially in more recent years. And so can you talk a little bit more about how that's a focus area of the organization and kind of your hopes for KYA's future, especially in that realm?
Yeah. So, if in my mind, if KYA is the independent voice for Kentucky's kids, we need to be learning from Kentucky's kids across every corner of our Commonwealth. And now we are obviously a Louisville-based organization. We have staff kind of spread out in different regions of the state, but it's really easy to, to focus on where we are. And so we have to be really intentional to ensure that we are out in different parts of the state, learning from organizations that serve kids directly or learning from kids directly themselves, as well as their parents, so that when we are representing kids in Frankfort as KYA, we are actually bringing the voices of kids and what they hope to see and need, but then also the ways in which we get to know people out in, all 120 Kentucky counties helps us to mobilize potential advocates to talk to their state legislators, to talk to other elected officials who represent them, because they are they're there to work for them. And the more that we can get our connections and our folks out in the community mobilized and educated on how to have those conversations, the better off we all are. So I'm really looking forward to continuing to grow that, to have KYA showing up in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different areas across the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. And well, and thinking about those advocates and those opportunities to engage with legislators, I know one thing we talk about at KYA, and it's kind of been a tone across many sectors, is how advocates are faced with complex political, philanthropic, and media landscapes, with seemingly increased urgency to solve so many big issues that are impacting our kids and families, their well-being, and their outcomes, and how they grow up, and how they can grow into adults. And so, what do you see as some of those biggest opportunities for KYA as the independent voice for Kentucky's kids in Frankfurt and beyond, or in smaller communities as well?
So I think one of the biggest benefits of being more connected globally, across the state, just in different ways when it comes to technology, there is a better understanding of how systems kind of interact with each other,
Mhm.
right? So how housing impacts a child's education. And with Kentucky Youth Advocates being multi-sector, we have experts in health, juvenile justice, child welfare, economic security, and education that can come together and collaborate around seeing one, what the problems are, but then also what the potential solutions are, which are often, you know, complex solutions that involve multiple sectors to engage and really collaborate and figure out how to tackle different things. I think one good example of that is we have children across the Commonwealth of Kentucky who lack access to oral health care. We just don't have enough pediatric dentists, or we don't necessarily have enough oral health providers who can take Medicaid. So one of the solutions to that is mobile dentistry,
Mhm.
or utilizing kids when they are at school to go out to that mobile dentistry and get their teeth cleaned and checked and look for cavities. So that is the education system interacting with the health system. That doesn't happen if we're not talking to each other. So we're multi-sector, and I think that's a big benefit to us as we continue to address those big complex problems. But then also, looking ahead, KYA being the independent voice for kids, we are going to be engaged in the gubernatorial election in 2027, as far as making sure that every single candidate who is involved is aware of what's going on with kids, and they have a platform and strong understanding of what they would like to have as far as their vision in their gubernatorial seat. So if they become governor, what's their platform around kids? And I want to make sure that KYA is at the table helping to shape that vision and really being a resource around the research and data that we have access to and that we can impart on those gubernatorial candidates. And then, I think as we continue to see how our federal policies and how our federal budget is shaping the access to supports or lack of access to supports in Kentucky, I think us continuing to translate the impact of federal policies for Kentucky kids is a real clear need, and something that Kentucky is uniquely KYA is uniquely qualified to do. Um, so I'm excited to move into that space in an even bigger and broader way. And then also, identify those common ground, common sense policy priorities that our state legislators can get around, because we know that kids' issues, by and large, can be nonpartisan. So having more kid champions in Frankfurt is a strong opportunity that I think we see as well.
Yes, absolutely. And to build off of that and kind of getting into the flip side almost, but so one of KYA's greatest strengths is being nonpartisan and add a systems focus, having a systems focused lens, like you just kind of talked about, in that multi-sector approach. And that approach, coupled with our focus on data and lifting up lived experience, which you've been talking about, that really has resulted in dozens of policy wins through the years, through the Blueprint for Kentucky's Children Coalition, through our many initiatives focusing on different sectors. But on the other hand, we've also faced some of the toughest legislative sessions and toughest funding landscapes to date, both for state but also for nonprofits right now. So, what do you see some of the biggest challenges facing KYA and other, some of our peers in child serving and other nonprofit organizations? What are some of the biggest challenges that we're seeing?
So, as a nonprofit organization, the funding landscape has definitely shifted, and Kentucky Youth Advocates will adapt to identify opportunities where we have that expertise and, focus on sustaining the bottom line and really producing quality work that people have come to expect from Kentucky Youth Advocates. Because as a nonpartisan organization that is ideally providing systems focused information for our
Mhm.
legislators, for our decision makers, whether it's on a state level, local level, or federal level. We'll continue to do that. We will continue to also look for ways to partner around that to sustain the bottom line and be adaptable as a nonprofit organization. Now, our child serving partners are also facing some tough decisions because of cuts that have happened on the federal level, which then resulted in cuts on the state level. And one of the things that's important for KYA to do is to monitor how are kids being impacted by those cuts. What does it mean if there's a reduction in family preservation programming and
Mhm.
we're seeing an increase in the number of kids coming in out of home care? Do we have a sufficient continuum of behavioral health opportunities for kids to access when they are dealing with significant mental health issues? So we will be monitoring and having frequent and continued conversation with child serving agencies across the state to understand, like, what are the trends, what are the
Mhm.
systemic solutions that they identify, and what are some of the things that we need to bring to those potential gubernatorial candidates as we see that as an opportunity to infuse more knowledge and creative thinking around how to adequately invest in kids and families, because what we know is the ROI there is strong. When we're
Yes.
investing in kids, we're seeing better outcomes for their adulthood and well into the future when it comes to employment, housing, and all of those essential things that make Kentucky's kids and families thrive. And then, KYA is and should be expected to produce information about what's happening with this ever-changing political landscape. We know that things move fast, and things seem to be moving faster than ever. So staying on top of that and translating that information to our partners so that they're aware of what's going on is a really critical part of what we do. But it's also a challenge being able to keep up with what's happening, especially as we have had to, address some of the same funding challenges that our partners see when it comes to staffing and adequately covering everything that needs to be covered. So I'm hopeful, and also know that we've got some things to figure out when it comes to the ever-changing landscape on funding and the political side of things.
Absolutely. It's so, we always talk about there's so many opportunities, there's so many challenges, but there's also so many opportunities to learn and grow from those. And for our listeners who may not know, KY has been around for nearly 50 years. And in fact, we'll be celebrating our 50th year next May in 2027. And so through those 50 years, we've learned a lot. We've had a lot of focus areas and new directions and a lot of growth and connections throughout the state, as we've been kind of talking about throughout this episode. And so when we're thinking about that big milestone and all that comes with the weight of, okay, so reflecting on 50 years and what does the next 50 years look like, having a new leadership in charge. And so when thinking about all of that, and what is your hope for KYA under your leadership, and what can we expect from you?
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think people have come to know and understand the role that KYA plays in the child policy space when it comes to producing data and research that can be trusted and that has the credibility to carry it along to meetings, to conversations about shaping policy with our decision makers. So continuing to maintain that credibility and reliability among our decision makers is top priority for me when we're thinking about celebrating our 50 years and into the next 50 years. Continuing to use tools like Kids Count, engaging young people in advocacy efforts, engaging our partners who serve kids in shaping policy recommendations for our state policymakers. That's top of mind for me when we think about 50 years. So, KYA has gotten a really strong footing, especially under Dr. Brooks' leadership. And I intend to maintain that and grow it even further where possible. And it's also, a 50-year anniversary is a golden anniversary. So what does that look like when we talk about sustaining Kentucky Youth Advocates and the potential of investing in KYA as we move ahead and as we look to continuing the really important work that we do, especially when it comes to advocacy and lobbying and some of those types of work that we definitely rely on our donors to support. So really looking forward to celebrating with folks who have been around for a long time and have
Mhm.
known KYA for a long time, but then also newer folks that have come into the fold and have really started to get a sense of what KYA does and what we're good at.
Yes, and so for our listeners, stay tuned for upcoming information about, well, ways to support KWA, but also how to help us celebrate next May. So we'll kind of start wrapping up here, but so finally for our avid listeners of the Making Kids Count podcast, can you lay out your vision for what we hope that this podcast will do, what we hope folks can get from it, how we can hope to use it to equip and mobilize advocates even more intentionally, like you've been talking about. So, yeah, what's kind of your vision for the Making Kids Count podcast?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, if you are an avid listener of the Making Kids Count podcast, please reach out to us and let us know what episodes particularly stick out to you, what you really enjoy as far as the guests that we bring on or the topic areas, because I think we do better and know better when we hear that feedback from our
Mhm.
listeners. But then also, I think that our podcast has the potential to really illuminate kid and youth perspective and the voices of young people across our Commonwealth. So I will be challenging our team at KYA to look for and invite and bring into the fold those young people who are excited about what they are doing in their communities or on the state level when it comes to advocacy, the issues that they're interested in, and bringing the voices of young people into the podcast more often. We will obviously continue to elevate issues that the General Assembly and other state and local officials need to focus on. I'm hopeful that we have elected and appointed officials that glean information, glean ideas, potential solutions, or priorities from our podcast. I'd like to continue to uplift those. Also, would be happy to have feedback from our from those members of the General Assembly or local officials to get that feedback on what they'd like to hear more of. And then I would love to have our listeners end each episode with that call to action in their ear, whether it's they're contacting their state legislators around a certain priority. They learn or seeking to learn more about an issue or data point, going to our Kids Count the dashboard or going to our website and blog to learn more, or in their community, connecting with a young person about one of the topics that we talked about and really getting their perspective and understanding, like, how does that impact you? What does vaping look like in your community among your young people? Is that an issue that our young people are wanting to talk about, even if it's a tough conversation, having those conversations with young people, whether it's a kid in your home or a kid that you connect with in some other regular way, at church or as part of a community group that you engage with. So talking to young people and really understanding from
Yeah.
them, they've got a lot of insight, what's important to them and what you should know and learn more about. So that's what I'm hopeful for. I would love to see more young people on our podcast, but then also, other guests who serve and connect with young people.
Yeah, I think developing the Making Kids Count podcast when we were originally doing that, and then now continuing that legacy is what can we learn from other folks? How can we share that learning? And then what call to action can we offer folks? So thanks for laying out that vision. Really excited to be, I'm really looking forward to this next chapter. So in honor of closing out each of our episodes with a call to action for our listeners, I do have 3 ways that folks can take action today if they're interested, some low-hanging fruit and some maybe thought-provoking things. But one, if you aren't subscribing to the Making Kids Count podcast on whatever streaming platform or app that you're using, be sure to do that so you can like and subscribe and never miss an episode. So we'd really love that. And be sure to follow KYA on social media as well. That's where we share some of our most up-to-date events, blog posts, reports, other opportunities to engage. So really being able to plug in on our social media and our website is another way to get a lot from KYA. And finally, as we've been talking about, if there's a way in which you're interested in supporting KYA and kind of this next chapter of the organization, we really encourage you to go to kyouth.org/sponsor, where we have a breakdown of all of the available sponsorship opportunities right now, including some upcoming Blueprint regional convenings. So more to come on those. Be sure to check out the website on that. The Kentucky Kids Count Project, and of course, our annual Children's Advocacy Day at the Capitol, which we are just beginning to plan. So look forward to sharing more details about that. So your support, our listeners, our sponsors, our donors, and all of the many great funding partners that we work with, your support ensures that we remain steadfast in all of the advocacy efforts that Shannon's talked about today. So I really appreciate this conversation. I think, Shannon, before we close out, are there any kind of closing thoughts or thought-provoking questions or comments that you would like to leave folks with today?
Yeah, so internally, a lot of us have been talking about engaging young people in the process of civic engagement and voting and learning the process of how policy gets made. And what we hear is just a lack of hope. And so I'll leave people with this question, which is, how are you working towards making Kentucky the best place in America to be young and encouraging young people to remain hopeful? So that's all I got.
I love it. I love it. Well, like Shannon said, we love to have feedback. So if you have a response to that or have any questions or suggestions or anything like that for us, please reach out. We are really looking forward to continuing on with the Making Kids Count podcast. So thanks for tuning in for today's episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Making Kids Count podcast. For more information and to listen to more episodes, visit kyouth.org/podcast. To support this podcast and our mission as the independent voice for Kentucky kids, please consider making a gift at kyouth.org/donate.